Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. If you're watching this interview on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening to the podcast, a review would always be nice. So today, my guest is Eric Chen. He is an engineering manager. I reached out to him for one reason, but after speaking with him, I decided that he really needed to be a guest of the podcast. And why? Because he has an approach to engineering management that I think more people need to hear. And at some point, I'm sure we'll get to speaking questions too. So welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Eric.
Thank you.
So from the bit of research I did on you, I saw that you studied biochemistry in school. So what was the motivation to do that?
I thought I was going to be a doctor, and I actually couldn't decide between it being a doctor, which my mom wanted to be, and a researcher, which my dad was. So I kind of did both. But then I realized a little bit into it that I didn't really want to do that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned being a doctor. So I initially wanted to be a doctor too. Do you remember the show ER?
Yeah, definitely.
I used to watch that show on Thursdays. And I noticed that a lot of those doctors, they had to sleep at the hospital, and they had to get woken up at all times of the day and night to do surgeries and do their job. And I recognized then that being a doctor, I don't think was for me. This whole
Yeah, I don't know if it was that part. Like I could probably do that. I have a couple relatives that are doctors, actually more than a couple. I think at that age and time in my life, like I lacked the empathy. Like I had the scientific know-how, but I didn't have the interpersonal interest and skills. So that's why it wasn't right for me at the time.
Yeah, I get that. I don't think I had those either. So it's a really good thing that I didn't end up being a doctor. So you have that. So you study biochemistry, but then you end up in the tech world. So how did that happen?
That was an interesting and fortuitous event in my life. When I decided I want to switch, I think it was 2001, and or no, maybe it was 1999. Maybe 1999, and that was just the dot-com boom was happening. Like back then, the only place to spend your money online was Amazon and maybe eBay or PayPal. And so it wasn't very mature yet. And so and tech was growing and they needed people. And at that time, not anymore now, they would hire people that could convince them they had the aptitude. And nowadays, you have to at least go to boot camp and show that you have the skills, not just aptitude.
Yeah. I've actually had a couple of guests that went to boot camps. It's always interesting to talk to them as well because I'm always curious as to their path and how more difficult, if at all, was it as opposed to somebody who came in with a computer science or a computer engineering degree. It seems like more and more companies are open to people that come with boot camp backgrounds, and that's great. But it does seem that there's still some dinosaurs out there that kind of want to see that computer science background.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, I mean, I've mostly been at companies where they were looking for more background, or they looked with an eye askance at boot camp, like they weren't sure, how good the training was, and so just looked that over with a twice over instead of once over.
Yeah. Okay, so now you're working in tech. You're an engineer in tech, and you're moving up the ranks. At some point, you decide, or you become a manager. I'm curious. Was that something that you planned on doing, or was that something that just happened?
Well, more of the former than the latter, but it's not like I had this grand vision. Actually, when I was younger and earlier in my career, I thought I'm just going to be I don't know. I made up these reasons in my head. Like I kind of knew I didn't have the people skills, and so I just made up a story in my head that, oh, I don't want to be a manager, like just a little bit more money for a lot more responsibility. But that was just me making up stuff. Eventually I got into, no, I became a client of a life coach. So I got life coaching for like over 10 years, and I developed these weaker sides of myself, like interpersonal skills. And then I realized that I really did have an interest in people, and like there was a lot of warmth and richness in people, dealing with people. And so that's kind of how it got started, how I got interested in it. And then eventually I asked, I mean, I rose to like tech lead, but I had to ask a new company when I was looking for a new job for opportunity in management. They were happy to give me the opportunity. So that's how it happened.
But what prompted you to seek a life coach in the first place?
Wow, I mean, not that you planned it or we planned it, but this is going all over the place into all the areas of my life. I first got a life coach like after my first divorce. Like I was having a tough time, and I'm like, man, even if I set some, like, let's say my marriage like ended, like let's say I get that back on track, it just forced me to take a real look at my life. I'm like, even if I get back into a nice relationship, I'm not sure I would be happy. There's just a few other things, like I have sports companions, but I wouldn't call them friends, like, because when I have problems like in my relationship, they're not really there. So I mean, I'm not blaming them, it's just the kind of relationships I formed. So I mean, I just took a hard look at my life. I'm like, okay, I make good money in tech. I take vacations. I have a car. I own a condo in the city at the time, and I was married, but I wasn't. There was a lot of areas in which I would say I wasn't happy. So I was seeking help, and I tried coaching, and it worked really well for me.
Oh, okay, that's interesting because whenever I think of coaching, engineers aren't the first people that come to mind because a lot of us, when we come out of school, especially the ones that actually got engineering degrees, we think we're the top of the top, and I think a lot of us have to get humbled through the things happening in our lives to realize that maybe there are some things that we could work on. I mean, my own journey, even in starting Teach the Geek, had to do with me having to give presentations in front of people, and many of whom were decision makers, and my project getting canceled at some point. And then I'm realizing maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. Maybe this is something I need some help in. So I commend you in seeing the fact that you needed help and you were willing to seek it out from someone else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I know what you're talking about. Thinking like we're the top. I'm the top of the top. We're the top of the top. Like we're doing so well. We're killing it in life, but life is very multifaceted. There's an infinite number of things to be good at. You could be good at dealing with people, good at dealing with finances, good with pets, good with horses, good at, I don't know, ice figure skating. I don't know. There's just infinite number of things to be good at. So we're all good at some things, and we're kind of bad in hiding it in other places, probably.
Oh, 100%. And looking back on when I worked as an engineer, I certainly can see that in myself and see that in other people too. And I think to myself, well, I'm glad that I eventually sought some help in getting better at what I wanted to get better in. But for others, I wonder if they ever did, because if not, then they very well could be in the same place that they were back then. And I'm talking, this is like 15 years ago at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So at some point, now you're an engineering manager. You moved up from being an individual contributor. You're managing people. What is the one thing that you recognized in managing people that you did not anticipate?
The one thing that I recognized.
Yeah, one thing that you recognized in having to manage people that maybe something that you didn't anticipate, you weren't really prepared for.
Yeah, it doesn't have to do just with um the people I manage. It had to do with my relationship in between upper management and the individual contributors. Like I sometimes found myself caught in the middle. Like upper management wants one thing for the direction of the company, and the employees might want or need something different, and that puts me in a really tough place.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And how did you reconcile that?
Um, the best I could, and it's still a learning experience. I mean, you want to. I mean, I want to advocate for everyone. I want to advocate for my team, the one that I represent. I want to understand where the management is, and I want to try to join the two parties in the middle so that they understand each other and can hopefully benefit each other. Yeah, instead of forgetting one end or the other.
When it comes to leadership, do you think that leaders should have their own style, or should they lead people based on how those people want to be led?
Oh, well, I don't think it's a choice. I think each person is as different as each piece of fruit. I mean, you have your own leadership style. You can try to learn other ones or learn general skills, but eventually you're going to add your own flavor to it anyways.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the way it goes. I mean, everyone has their own personality, I guess their own, sensibilities. But then if you come across somebody who doesn't really jive with that, then what do? I don't know. You request that they get moved off your team, or you have to kind of figure out some sort of compromise.
Well, that's something that I really enjoyed about management, which your question prompts, which is, I mean, yeah, you'll find somebody that doesn't quite fit on the team with the people on it, with the job as required or requested, or with you as the manager, or with somebody, with some other team that they have to work with. And for me, what that meant was it's just time to have a talk and get to know their experience, what's going on for them. Who knows? They got something personal going on. Who knows? They have some past experience with you. They heard something about you, but they never bothered to verify it. They have some other problem with somebody on a team member. They don't feel heard or listened to. So it's different and individual every time, but that was one of the parts of my job that I really enjoyed. Yeah, it's
Okay.
just getting to know what's going on, getting to know their side of the story, and then seeing what you can do with it from there.
For somebody who said that initially you started off not really having that, I guess, that empathy for people, you certainly seem to have done a 180.
Well, yeah, if you knew me, you know, 10 years ago, 15, 20, you would say it was a 180.
Nice. So when it comes to just managing people, just management in general, what is your, I guess, your philosophy on it, and how do you think it differs from others that you've experienced?
Um, I I was very interested in the people side. Once I got interested in the people side, I got very interested in the people side. So one of the ways I showed and developed that interest in myself is I went to coaching school, like life coaching, executive coaching school, and I finished it. So I am a life coach, although I don't have active clients. Um, and oh, I lost my train of thought. Like, can you repeat the question for me? So I was on the way to answering you, but
Oh yeah, no problem. So I was asking about your stance on leading, and how has it differed than what you've experienced in the previous companies you've been at?
right. So this has developed over time. And I didn't just like land or be born this way. I was born this way, but I think of uh, leadership now as like lifting people up, supporting them. That might sometimes be through uh, through motivation or through that, but I want to distinguish that from manipulation. Like manipulation is like you represent the company or you represent your own interests or that of your org, whatever, and you want something to happen, so you try to get that to happen. It could be through enticements, it could be through uh, I don't know, threats or something. A different way, carrot and stick, different way to motivate people, but really you're trying to get what you want to happen. And I want to distinguish that from lifting up, supporting, and seeing what is needed by all parties involved, because that's the latter view has the view that we're all people. Each of those people that you in the old you're trying to manipulate, get to do stuff. They're actually people. They're trying to like live their life and be happy and be successful too. So if you're just looking at them as productivity machines and value generating machines, you're not seeing them as people. And then the next step is just imagine if the roles reversed. I mean, you probably have almost everybody has somebody above them. So what if they're doing that to you? Is that really what you want, or do you want to see each other as people wanting the same thing as you and help them along where possible?
It's so interesting when you say that, Eric. The idea of the way you're treating others, would you want to be treated that way too? And I think a lot of people don't even think about that. They're thinking about what they need to do to move up within an organization. What do they need the people under them to do so that they look good, so they're able to move up within an organization? And it's not really about, well, what do I need to do to improve myself so that the people under me are actually more inclined to work with me and work for me well. And it's just it's so interesting that you mentioned that. It just
Yeah, thank you for putting that so clearly and succinctly. I didn't like fully describe that other side of the equation that I was advocating against, but you did. So I really appreciate that. And I want to say that, the side that I described, I tried to model it. And once in a while, I would inspire not only the people on my team or that I was managing, but also the people above me. Sometimes they would hear me talk, and I think I would change their perspective a little bit.
Imagine that. And hey, and if it works out for the company, then all the better. I mean, sometimes it is necessary to manage up. It's just hopefully the people that you're doing that to are amenable to that managing up and they don't push back on it.
Well, you never know. It was a mixed bag, but I can only do what I can do. I could try to be my best self and see if it rubs off anywhere.
Absolutely. So Eric, when people will come onto this show, whether it's this podcast, this YouTube channel, the whole idea of it, the beginnings of it, were myself, as I mentioned earlier, not being all that great at giving presentations in front of others, and that project that I was brought into a company to do being canceled, and me then realizing maybe communicating with others is something that I need to get better at. And the first thing I realized, at least with myself, is that as a technical person, I wasn't the best at putting things in such a way that non-technical people, many of whom were decision makers, could understand. So now looking back, I can recognize why my project got canceled all them years ago. So when it comes to speaking in front of others, communicating in general, is that something that you've always been good at? And if not, what did you do to get better at it?
No, I haven't always been good at it. I'm not sure I'm great at it. I think I'm perfectly adequate to slightly good at it. You know what changed? What happened for me at the beginning was I was very nervous or anxious, and I felt that all eyes were on me, and I mean, which they probably are when I'm speaking. But that my words and actions were so important, and they were going to be judged and weighed every single word. I was just so concerned about me, uh, what the impact of my presentation would have in my speaking, and I don't know. It was just a lot of anxiety about me. Like, am I going to do well on this? Like, let's say test or event. And gradually, I don't exactly know how, but um, I came to believe that when I was speaking, I had something important to share, either because it was my subject area, or I had experience, or I had training. Because I in my previous company, I delivered some trainings on subjects I care about, like mindfulness and happiness, and how do you even have a happy life? What is happiness in life? I mean, I gave those talks, and so I just, and sometimes I gave technical talks about my area, but I just I came to believe that I had something to share and it was important, or at least it's important to me. Like, I had a passion for sharing it. And it was more about my knowledge and my passion for sharing than about, well, what are the people going to think about me? What are they going to do afterwards? So I was less nervous about my future or what was going to happen to me than just sharing something that I was passionate about.
I find it so interesting that you gave talks on mindfulness in a tech environment. I'm curious, how were those talks received?
Well, attendance was voluntary, so I think it was pretty well received by the people who decided to come.
Yeah, and those other people that didn't come there, they're like, what the hell is this guy talking about, man?
Well, on those subjects, mindfulness, interpersonal skills, uh, I wanted to title this. It was actually maybe a course that lasted over 3 weeks or 3 sessions. I wanted to title it "How to Become a Staff Engineer" because in tech, there's this big divide between senior engineer and staff engineer, and I think, and maybe other people think, that the divide can have a lot to do with people skills and your ability to influence people and projects. So I wanted to title like something about interpersonal happiness, mindfulness, just non-technical skills that I wanted to teach. I wanted to title that course, but it didn't end up being titled that way. How to become a staff engineer.
Okay, got it. When it comes to the presentations that you do, Eric, do you have a process for putting them together? And if so, what is it?
Um, sure. No, I have a presentation. in my head, I probably think of the story I want to tell. I'm thinking of slides, like slideshow presentation, and I don't know that there's anything like specifically interesting or a story to tell. I mean, I just come up with the story. I'm a kind of succinct kind of person, so it's usually not a whole bunch of slides. It's usually a few slides. Well, anyway, I think of the way I want to tell it. What's the importance? Maybe I mean, maybe there's some background. You know, as you said, there might be some non-technical people or people who aren't as familiar with the subject area. So, what do I need to do to catch people up? And so, I think about my audience, and then any background I needed. Then the meat of the story, which is probably possibly data, maybe possibly a vision, and then yeah, then maybe there's a conclusion or recommended steps. So it's kind of chronological order, but it starts with me, for me, with, I mean, there's a subject, but there's the audience. So first I start with the audience.
Well, that was smart on your part, and that's definitely not something I did when I first started giving presentations. Is taking the audience's needs and wants into account when putting the presentation together. I didn't do that at all. I would get up there and I would read slides and I would try to get out of there as quickly as possible. And I never got out of there as quickly as possible, Eric, because I'd get questions afterwards that I thought I'd answered during the presentation, but as I mentioned earlier, because I didn't put things in a way that these non-technical people could understand. Now, I mean, if I was sweating bullets before and during the presentation, now I'm really sweating. I'm getting these questions I thought I had answered.
Yeah,
it was a trial by error, that's for sure. You would have thought I would have gotten the message maybe after the first or second presentation, but it took my project being canceled. I was arrogant.
You didn't have somebody to mentor you or guide you at the time?
No, I didn't have anything like that. And I noticed a lot of the other engineers that give those type of presentations, they weren't all that much better than at them than I was. So I certainly wasn't going to them for help. Bunch of blind people leading blind, I tell you.
Yeah.
So when it comes to giving presentations, do you ever get nervous before them? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
I guess I guess I get a little bit nervous. And again, I can recognize now that the nervousness has to do with, again, what are people going to think of me? Like, let's say, giving my talk on mindfulness and happiness. Are they going to think it's a waste of time or that's useless? So how do I think now I'll tell you how I did deal with it, and then probably the way I deal with it now might be a little bit different. I think the way I dealt with it is I practiced. I mean, I think that's important. I practiced, I rehearsed, I looked over my slides, I checked over my notes, see if those are the ones that help me remember what I want to say. I might have practiced speaking with a timer. I might have given some practice presentations to a few closer friends. That's how I dealt with it then. I guess I would just still do some of it. So I would still have to do that. But there's a different way I would deal with it now. I think I would probably find somebody, a trusted friend or possibly a therapist. Like, this is really a therapy model, and talk through my anxiety, because I've really recently been working through some different feelings of anxiety with a different thing with my therapist, and then I got through it. And then my therapist asked me at the end just yesterday, "Hey, what do you think helped you achieve this new way of perspective and way of seeing the world?" And I said, "I think it's just talking through it with you and my spiritual teacher, and having you listen, kind of like a pair, separately, like a pair of great parents, like I didn't have when I was growing up, just to talk through my emotions. Like, I'm feeling anxious about that. Okay, how does that feel? But in your body, and just talking through it, and then seeing what's underneath and what emerges. Like, something always emerges, like our natural state. We're not born into a state of anxiety, so something." Something put it there, some fear or hole or sense of inadequacy that we have. So we just talk through it. So anyway, that's a longer answer.
Wow, that's the first answer that I've gotten from that question ever. That's so interesting, and now hopefully it's working for you.
Yeah, well, I think we talked about this a little bit. Like what I've been working through with my therapist is around or is like a career change, like changing career. I always had anxiety about like, oh, how I'm going to pay for stuff. Like it makes a totally different amount of money. But yeah, I mean, that's what I was working through. So it doesn't matter what the problem is, public speaking, anxiety, anxiety about meeting your in-laws or future in-laws, or anxiety about a career shift. It's all the same. Like I just got to talk through it with somebody supportive and get through to what's underneath, and some belief that you have that you're insufficient in some way, which is not true, but just to bring that to the light of day and see what happens.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's absolutely necessary. So when it comes to giving presentations or public speaking in general, Eric, what would your number one tip be for anybody who's watching or listening to this conversation and getting better at it?
I think I would say trial run, like bounce it off one or a few people. Don't develop in a vacuum. You'll see what their reaction is, where they're confused. So yeah, or where they're really interested and they want to hear more, and you add another slide or two. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's helpful too. Just as you said, not developing things in a vacuum, because you may see things one way and then you show it to these trusted people and they see it completely differently. And if they see it completely differently, that might be a problem because the people in the audience might see it differently too. And so then maybe this is something that you need to improve on with your presentation. I totally take that point.
Or they might give you a great idea. It might be a collaborative thing that they give you something you want to build on too.
Yep, absolutely.
Actually, the way you describe it, I mean, it reminds me of tech companies. They're like fail fast and fail early. So that's just applying it to your presentation. Like get it out there, get some feedback. Don't just develop one big bang and say, okay, well, here's my presentation. I'm not changing it.
Right. Yeah, you gotta be open to that feedback for sure. Well, Eric, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
I think email is great. It's just my name reversed. So CHENERIC@gmail.com.
Excellent. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Bye, Neil.